Well, look, it's gone 8 o'clock, so I think we should make a start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jonathan Males, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Gary Buxton, and we're very pleased to be offering you this 30-minute webinar on the topic of resilience, which certainly seems like a timely topic at the moment. We've had a lot of interest in this webinar and the one next week as well. So without further ado, welcome for those of you who haven't encountered us yet. We're Mezzana Partners. We're an organisation that helps other organisations thrive by working with their leaders and their teams. We've been working in the area of resilience for more than 25 years, whether that's with people working in offshore oil rigs or in the NHS or in high performance sport. And our heritage itself comes from working with Olympic and Paralympic sport since 1992. So let's begin by defining what do we mean by resilience and resilient performance. For us, resilience performance is the capacity to achieve and sustain healthy high performance regardless of challenging conditions. And we very deliberately include the word performance in there because for us, simply to bounce back isn't sufficient. It's about bouncing back from setback, but also performing. So we've got quite an action-oriented definition of performance here. And for us, it's a readiness to learn, to perform, and to bounce back. We think and know that resilient performance is something that you can develop, but it does require a proactive investment. You've got to develop the skills, the mindsets, and very importantly, the relationships to maintain that capacity. Because it's not simply down to you as an individual. The world is too complex and too interconnected now for any one person to be able to tough it through by themselves. And whilst your individual mindset, your individual capacities are important, resilient performance comes down not just to you, but to your team and your organisation's culture as well. And if we think that if you make resilience too much of an individual focus, then we're missing something really important about the fact that it depends on the environment and the ecosystem within which you live as well. So when we put that together, we have seen over the years that there are some very important foundations for resilient performance, and they come from you as an individual, from the team that you're in, and your organisation. But then resilient performance also requires you to take a process. We call this the FAR process for foundations: anticipate, respond, and recover. So it's about anticipating, it's about looking ahead, being ready for what's coming at you, preparing so you're not caught out. It's being able to respond, having the performance skills to be able to deliver under pressure and do what you need to do. And then it's about recovering, which is about your capacity to learn, to bounce back and come back stronger. So when we put that together, we can see that for each stage of that cycle, there are things that you can do to prepare on an individual level, on a team level, and an organizational level. Today, in 30 minutes, we're going to focus on some key elements. We're not going to try and cover everything, but we're going to share with you what we believe is a key foundation for individuals, teams, and organizations, which is psychological safety. And we're going to share some insights from what we're noticing in our client work in relation to anticipate, respond, and recover. And for each of those, we're going to take a different lens. So for anticipate, we're going to take an organizational lens. For respond, we're going to take a team lens. And for recover, we're going to take an individual focus. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Gary, to talk through us about the key foundations. And the first one is psychological safety. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think psychological safety has, without a shadow of a doubt, become a bit of a hot topic as people have been speaking about the importance of getting the most from teams, but actually very few are beginning to bring resilience and psychological safety together in a meaningful way that helps us to find actionable ways of either doing things differently or creating aspiration in our team to start doing things in a new way. So to create the strong foundation, as we described, it's really about making sure that we all firstly understand what we mean by psychological safety and the work of David Rock. So psychological safety in its essence is about being able to show yourself without fear of negative consequences. So it's really having a shared belief that the team is open, that they're looking out for each other, that you can take risks, speak up, offer new ideas, ask questions, without that fear of feeling like you're going to be punished or embarrassed. So in psychologically safe teams, teams feel accepted and respected. Any contribution that they make in a meeting or one-on-one is going to be recognized and valued. And it really enables teams to share information, to learn and to perform. I'm sure we will all have at some time been in an organization or a team where the psychological safety is either still developing or perhaps has evaporated. And it's in those moments where we hold on to information, not share things through fear of potential consequences to ourselves. And ultimately, our principle in this is by investing our time in creating psychologically safe environments, we will help our teams to become good, resilient, performing organizations. So I think there's been a beautiful world of neuroscience in recent times, and we're going to lean into some of this just to kind of talk about the evolutionary context of our brain. And the first one is related to the magnetic resonance imaging scans, or the computerized tomography scans, so the MRI and CT scans that we've had in recent years. And they can do some very, very clever stuff, just measuring our brain and seeing what is happening. And as you can see in this, the two areas that are lit up in the brain are showing us what is happening inside our brain matter when we feel either social pain or physical pain. And pretty much to our brain, whether we are experiencing physical or social pain is indistinguishable. So my principle is we wouldn't accept people hitting each other in the workplace, and therefore we should really be working very, very hard to make sure that they're not also inflicting social pain on each other, because we know that that will have a hugely detrimental effect to psychological safety and team performance. So David Rock developed this theory in the first instance and fundamentally drew it into 5 principles, which I'm going to just slow down ever so quickly with a quick example from science before we kind of bring it all to a real life situation for things that I personally have seen in my coaching work over the last 18 months as we've been working through COVID. So first of all, David Rock came up with a great acronym, SCARF. So if you're ever kind of needing to remember each of the elements, SCARF is probably the most straightforward way to do it. And he started it with status. We know that status is an incredibly important thing to each of us as a human. Every single social encounter that we face, we're trying to work out whether it will enhance or diminish our social status. There's a great study in 2009, which was looking at the chemical balances of people. And when they found themselves in a situation where they felt that they were comparing unfavorably, their body started to release cortisol as part of their stress hormone. So any moment where we feel like our status is being compromised, we then start to feel unsafe and stressed. So there's a common misconception. Many organizations are thinking how they might improve someone's status, and a common way might be to give them a promotion. But actually, again, going back to neuroscience, we can see in our brain that the reward centers in our brain, in response to a comment like, you've done a good job, are exactly the same as having a financial windfall. So, being nice to people, attesting to their status, doesn't have to be about promotions. Sometimes it can just be about saying you've done a good job. So certainty, I bet some of you are thinking, I'm not quite sure how I could have brought an awful lot of certainty over this incredibly changing period, but certainty is definitely a contributing factor to how psychologically safe people feel. I think our brain likes to do things that it's familiar with. It helps it to be efficient and to go into autopilot. And when we are doing something familiar, it often means that we can do 2 things at once. A good example of this is driving whilst talking with your passenger. The fascinating thing, of course, as again, many of us who drive will know, as soon as, for example, a car in front of us brakes, then an error signal goes off in our brain, and all of a sudden we can't do the talking to the passenger anymore. We have to concentrate on the road. And so this is illustrative, again, of that stress hormone being released and our body having to focus in a more single-minded way on the task in hand. So certainty is definitely a contributing factor to creating psychologically safe teams. Autonomy is the next one. Daniel Pink did some great work around the things which create motivation, which he said were purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And so lots of people have noticed that the more autonomous you feel, the more control you have over your life, the less stress you are likely to experience. And interestingly, when looking at organizations where there's high levels of micromanagement, for example, actually one of the things that does is it increases ambiguity and uncertainty for the employees, because of course they don't have agency, so they're not really sure what's going to be happening next for them, because it may be decided by someone else who's going to swoop in and give a guiding eye. So ways in which we can create autonomy are very powerful. Brilliant study, which amuses me greatly, was about franchise owners in the US, and it built the principle that people wanted to set up a franchise because they wanted a better work-life balance. And then when you go back and study the same people, actually they're often working longer hours and often for less money, but they felt like they had a better work-life balance. And one of the fundamental reasons for that is because they had choice about when they worked and how they worked. The next one's relatedness, a sense of belonging, really feeling like we're connecting with people. And our brain all the time, whenever we meet someone new, is just going friend or foe and working out whether this is someone that we're going to be able to connect with or not. Now, the great thing is when we take time to work out what we have in common, our brain releases oxytocin, and oxytocin, as you know, is the cuddle hormone. It's the one that is associated with generosity, with parental behavior, and with affection. So we know that creating opportunities for people to connect is a powerful way of creating psychological safety. And then the final one is fairness. Fairness is hardwired. I've been reading a book recently about how it's hardwired in primates as well as, of course, in humans. And in this particular example, a study by Matthew Lieberman found out that people act more favorably being given 50 cents in the dollar than they do to being given 8 out of $25, because actually they feel that there was an equity in getting 50 cents. So even though $8 is far significantly a greater amount of money, they preferred the 50 cents. So what do we do about that? You know, it's all well and good knowing about psychological safety, but what are the key take homes that Mezzana and you might be able to do to drive that? So for status, I think it's just very human, showing everyone a little bit of respect, making sure that you're not pitting people up against each other. Pitting people up against each other makes people feel that there are winners and losers. Winners and losers will then often have a sense of cortisol being flooded through your system, especially for all but the 10% who might be considered the winners. For certainty, absolutely no doubt it is difficult, but certainty is big tasks down into manageable chunks so that the horizons are much, much closer, particularly during moments of significant change. For autonomy, optimizing delegated authorities, really thinking about, is it me that makes this decision, or is it something that I can give to one of my team? And then relatedness, I think this is really difficult for all of us who are working remotely, but just thinking about, particularly when we've got new members of the team, thinking about how do we create the social interactions, potentially through Zoom, potentially through meeting in a park in the imminent future, who knows, but just for people to see each other face to face and to create that social connection. And ultimately, fairness. Try not to choose favorites and try and share information in a way that is timely as possible. People can often feel that there's unfairness if you've been holding on to information for longer than it might be necessary. So anything that kind of promotes fairness is great. So as you can see, this is the foundational elements of the resilient performance model. And then we're going to go ever so quickly into anticipate, respond, and recover. So anticipate, as you might expect, is the only thing it's certain in this world is that everything changes, and therefore building a capability within our organizations to anticipate that there will be choppy waters ahead will help us then to respond to that as and when we get there. People who get taken by surprise, a bit similar to that car illustration earlier, tend to have much less of their brain available to them because they sort of go into an emergency mode. So just imagining what the world could be like and what you might do in that space would be effective. So the kind of organizations that I've been working with, so in early 2020, I started working with this entrepreneur. He had built this organization up to about 150 people. And so we were working on those preparations, you know, when you go from kind of founder entrepreneur into growth, where you can't really get across everything and do everything at the same time. So in actual fact, the work that we were doing together was to think about how he integrated delegation and agility into the organization. So helping people to move rapidly and respond to the market. To delegation, which is making sure that not all the information was coming to the center. Really thinking about the tidal waves of information that he was getting. Like, there comes a point when the organization creates so much information that it's not possible for one person to process all of it. And that can sometimes result in a reduced level of diligence, which means that you're not able to make such great decisions just because you don't have the time. And so in order to speed up decision making, it's about thinking about how far up that information needs to travel. So one of the practical tools that we use at Mezzana is a very simple kind of risk register, which helps people imagine what the future might hold, how likely we think that is to happen, and what we think the impact is. Now, tools like this not only help us to synthesize the potential future, but it also helps us to potentially explore what delegated authorities might look like, such that we could say, well, anything scoring below 20, then that can stay within the team. But anything that scores 50, let's pull it all the way up to the executive team. Lovely, Jonathan, thank you. Next area that we want to explore is respond. So respond is very much trusting your plan because you've done some anticipation, you've thought about what might come up, and your high performance habits will then help you to deliver under pressure. So in this example, I have been working with a director who was a new director, and she, I think it's fair to say, the first lockdown, the one that we had at the end of March last year, that was a pretty kind of tough moment. She had not long been in the job. She had not long built all the relationships and the connections with the team. And my coaching was, oh, you're starting a new job. And so, you know, let's kind of help you process all of the weird, wonderful information that comes as a result of that. Then the first lockdown happened and it felt like, oh my God, I'm learning a new job at the same time as having to do all of this brand new stuff as well. And we worked together to explore, well, you know, this isn't all on you. It isn't even all on your team. Potentially, we can explore to a much deeper level what the environmental strengths are. So I think there's always this sense of a slight kind of heroic leadership in the sense of, you know, you have to do it all for yourself, but actually slowing down the conversation, thinking about how to unlock discretional effort in the team, flexibility, support, and transparency between team members is achieved through giving that kind of really human engagement and helping people to understand. So how did we do that? We made sure that we curated team conversations that were covering the 4 main areas of support that people need in order to feel safe, comforted, and effective so that they can perform. So the first one is informational support. So that's basically, who do we need to go to get certain bits of information? And really just everyone in the team talking about that. So there was a shared understanding when it was people within the team or when it was potentially people outside of the team. The next was instrumental support. This is the really practical stuff, like who's got the either intellectual property, the money, the equipment that you might need in order to deliver in the forthcoming challenge that we see. So just, again, facilitating that team discussion so that everyone has a mutual understanding about where to go. And then really importantly, the latter 2, which is the emotional support, like who is it that you can go to in order just to talk about your hopes and fears and what's going on at the moment for you personally? How are you going to make sure that you're having conversations that just recharge your batteries and give you a sense of regulation, a sense of comfort? And then that companionship support, which I think is the stuff that very often happens outside of work, but really calling that out, whether it's outside of work or inside of work. Who do you enjoy spending time with? Who would you typically go out and do things with, or just who do you have fun with? And again, kind of building that understanding of all of those environmental strengths helps to make a more resilient team and helps you to respond when an adverse event or a change is happening. Handing back over to Jonathan to think about the individual and how to recover.
Thanks, Gary. So the final stage in this resilient performance cycle is recover, which is about learning from experience and bouncing back stronger. And a key principle here is put your own oxygen mask on first, particularly if you're in a leadership role. It's very tempting to want to look after everyone else and help them recover, which absolutely is important. But if you're not doing that for yourself as a leader, you're really going to be compromised in your capacity to make good decisions and act wisely in relation to all the challenges that we've got. So it's really interesting what I'm seeing at the moment in terms of how people are coping or not at the moment in this third and hopefully last lockdown. It's funny, I was talking to a client the other day and he asked me, how am I? And I said, well, look, I've been struggling. I've had a really tough week this week. And he laughed. And he said, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. He said, you're always relentlessly positive, and to hear that you're struggling too is really reassuring to me. And I kind of laughed and I thought, yeah, there is something here about having some compassion for ourselves and each other, that it is tough. It is tough, and it's okay to be feeling it right now. I think that, as Gary said, we're not, the age of sort of superhuman leaders is well gone. We're all human. We're all going to be feeling it right now. And that is absolutely normal. And having some compassion and some self-acceptance for that is really important if we're going to recharge and be able to look after ourselves. So this is a time to get that balance right and to take time to recharge. And in particular, one of the things we want to pick up on here is to find the learning from this time. We're going through, gosh, do you remember when unprecedented was the word that everyone was using all the time? We haven't heard it so much lately, but these are still pretty unusual times. We can learn from this period. We're not going to be here forever. We can take some good lessons forward from this. And that's a really critical thing to do. And the other thing which I think I'm seeing is making a difference is that some leaders I'm working with are getting much better at being able to say no. They're getting better at managing their boundaries, putting in time boundaries. When do they start? When do they finish? When do they let the phone go to voicemail? When do they secure time in their diary? It's tough, but I'm seeing that people are finally learning how to do this. They're recognizing they've got to carve out that time and put some boundaries in to give that time and capacity to recover and recharge. So the key skill we want to share with you in relation to this is the whole idea of the growth mindset. This is based on Carol Dweck's work. Many of you are probably familiar with this. When I've got a growth mindset, I'm open to learning. I don't assume that my qualities are fixed. And this is really important in terms of that toughness aspect. If I'm operating from a fixed mindset, I will assume that if I'm working hard, I must be doing something wrong. It's got to be easy because I'm clever. It's got to be easy because I'm good at what I do. Rather than having a growth mindset that says, look, I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to have to learn. There will be times when it's going to be tough. So some beautiful questions here, which would really encourage you to bear in mind. The simplest one, well, what am I learning? Well, what did I learn from that experience? If the proverbial hit the fan, okay, what do we learn from that? What can we do better now? What can I do better now? If this has got an individual focus. How have my capacities increased? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, said Nietzsche. It's probably still true today. What options exist now that didn't exist before? What new possibilities are coming along? How can I think differently now? Now, if we're going to respond and adapt, we've got to learn to think differently. We've got to get new ways of making sense of ourselves, the world, the problems that we face. And take some self-esteem from this. What can you feel proud of? What have you done that's made a difference, that sustained you, that sustained other people, for which you can feel proud and take a bit of a warm inner glow? So please remember this idea of having a growth mindset, and growth and fixed mindsets are not binary. I feel we can kind of move from one to the other. And I can certainly know the times when I find myself working from a fixed mindset, and it's not helpful. So ask these sorts of questions to really try and keep open to possibilities. So in our final few minutes, just to wrap up then, what we've tried to show here is that resilience is not just down to you as an individual. It is based on foundations that are required for you as a person, but also in your team and in your organization. And once those foundations are in place, it gives you the capacity to go through this important cycle of anticipation, respond, and recover. And that's going to be an ongoing process. But when you can get this right, then your capacity to perform in a sustained way, in a healthy way, is what will come through. So we've shown today that psychological safety is one of the key foundations. There are others, but we've picked on it because it's such a key element which works across all elements of individual, team, and organization. And there are things that you can do as a leader, you can do within your team to create a safer place where it's more possible for people to show up as human beings. And that's what it's about, recognizing that we're human beings, we're all in a tough situation. Let's look out for one another, let's care for one another, let's make it okay to not be okay right now. That's part of what psychological safety is about. We've touched on a key tool for each aspect of anticipate, respond, and recover. So Gary talked about the risk register. Environmental strengths, a great thing you can do with your team to look around to see where the support, and on an individual basis, I touched on using it on maintaining a growth mindset, being open, looking for what you can learn. So if we were to distill this 30 minutes down into 3 key points, we might say, give time. Resilience is a skill. It doesn't happen by accident. It's not something you're born with. So give time for you and your team to build your resilience foundations. If you give the time, you'll get the benefit. If you don't give the time, you'll suffer, frankly. Second point is, I think that as a leader, no matter how senior you are, you have a capacity to shape the culture. You have the capacity to shape and influence the type of interactions, the type of relationships you have with your teammates and your team. Look to create safety. Look to make it okay to be human. Really important. And finally, try to keep some perspective. Recognize where you are on that cycle of foundations, anticipate, respond, or recover at any time. Give yourself time to stop, to sit back, to get on the balcony and reflect on what's going on for your team or your organization, and ask, where are we right now? Where do we need to be paying attention? Are we in the midst of everything, so we've just got to be responding? Are we in a bit of a lull so we can be recovering and learning? Or are we in a situation where we start to look ahead and do some planning? And at any given time, your focus needs to be somewhere on that cycle. But if you're not stepping back and taking that perspective to think about that, you're not going to be able to enable the kind of resilient performance that you will want from yourself and your team. So thank you very much. We're just about up to time, but if there are any questions in a minute or two, we'd love to take them. So if you have a question, please come off mute and we'll try to do our best to answer a question before we finish now.
Hello, hi.
Yep, hi.
Hi. Just wondered, do you think that capitalism will start to shift after the last year in a sense of maybe a kinder type of capitalism?
Oh, what a beautifully big question.
Yeah. Just my own background. I mean, I've worked in the big corporations and then changed to become a psychologist, and I'd love to see it, but I don't know if it's still at odds with one another. So.
Personally, I'd love to think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think my personal answer is I think that the answer lies in a different type of capitalism. I think there's some really good things around capitalism in terms of the ingenuity and energy it can unlock. I think there's some really toxic things about it as well, but I don't think the future lies in some form of communism, that's for sure. But let's see.
And I think, looking back historically, there have been some pretty significant events in our time, such as world wars, which then led to the creation of the NHS. And I think, You know, there's one thing collectively we've all done is really recognise the value of key workers and actually what's important. And I very much hope that that sense of importance can translate into policy going forward.
Time for one more question. Anyone like to ask?
Hi, Jonathan. Gary here.
Hi, Gary.
Yeah, I really like really enjoy this, really like the theory behind it. But I just get the feeling that the recovery part, when we get to that, there is 101 more projects coming your way with people expecting those deadlines. So the ability to say no, whilst in theory is wonderful, but in this day and age, we just barge from one project to the next project to the next, never having enough time in doing those. And that is the expectation of an organization in this day and age. So I don't really know what my question is around that. I sort of know the answer. Yes, I've got to say no and not do it. But then, that is not delivering on on the projects that we want to be. So, is there anything that we need to do with our leadership teams as well, with regards to actually influencing this and changing this so that actually recovery time is actually built in, because I get my boss saying to me, Gary, take a break, but then in the next sentence she's saying, but where's that project that you're dealing with? So that they say one thing but actions demonstrate another. So is there any way that we can sort of influence that upwards? And you know who I'm talking about.
Well, indeed, it's another great question. In a way, I think it connects with the first question in my mind. I think one of the assumptions behind capitalism is that every year's got to be more than the year before. And if you're not growing, you're not adding value, then something is wrong. And I think that until we tackle that assumption and start working on the idea of what's enough for us to make a good living, what's enough for us to look after our clients, what's enough, that to me is a key mindset shift. And I think one of the great it's been a strength, but also a drawback in capitalism is if you're not doing 10% more than the year before, you've failed. And that relentless driving, I think, is something we've got to challenge. And until we tackle that core assumption, I think it's going to be very hard to get the shift that you're talking about, Gary.
Okay.
I think to layer on that as well, having had a few clients that find it difficult to say no, apart from all the classic ways of helping someone say no, like flipping it around and saying, well, what are your hell yeses? So instead, just thinking about what do you say? Yes, actually, do you know what? This is going to be fundamentally important. It's really going to make a difference. I think it's going to streamline everything, have a big impact. And thinking about how you give those projects or ideas a little bit more of a buoyancy aid so that your time is invested into the areas that will make the most fundamental difference. Because sometimes those other peripheral projects can sort of slip away if you're concentrating on the fundamentals of hell yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Any more for any more?
I just had a quick one, if I might. I was just wondering how important the home environment is, for resilience and certainly the recovery as well, and also what a sort of leader can do for their employees to assist them with that, because obviously the home life is encroaching very much into the work life, and that seems to be one of the sort of key strains that we have at the moment. So do you have any sort of practical advice as to how we can sort of help on that side?
Oh, well, look, absolutely. And, when we talk about team, what we really mean is relationships. It's, so the family relationships within your family are just as important a source of resilience, as probably more important than your team relationships. So perhaps as a leader, recognizing that, acknowledging that, talking about that. I think one of the key things is to acknowledge the challenge that many people have, particularly if they're working from home, working with families. It's funny, I was doing some work the other day, and one of the complaints that was raised against the CEO was that in a conference call, he sort of made comment to going to going off to somewhere exotic for his summer holidays. And for him, it was completely innocent. But that's just what I did. So maintaining empathy for the fact that for most of his organization, they weren't jetting off to the tropics for their holidays. They were struggling with young kids at home. So maintaining that visible empathy, acknowledging that it's tough, going back to Gary's point, being really careful about expectations, putting some curfews maybe on email contact, saying it's okay. Look, you know, I don't expect a response outside of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m, something like that.
I think you made a point before about sitting on the porch or something like that and just having time to reflect on the day. And, you know, I think with the noise of people's families and all the rest of it, sometimes you just don't get that, and one goes into the next and the next and the next. And I suppose, yeah, that was something that really struck me. You know, can you set aside 20 minutes or half an hour just to actually have a bit of time for yourself to think about that? Well,
that's the oxygen mask on first. You know, even if it's 10. The other point here, there's a guy I know called Robert Twigger, wrote a great book. I think it was called Micro Skills or Micro Habits. But he made the point that you can do a lot in a short time. You know, so when it talks about recovery doesn't have to be a week off. Recovery might be 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Anticipation doesn't have to be a week-long planning workshop. It might be 5 minutes at the start of the day, thinking about what's coming up. So that cycle, you can tune into that in very small bites.
I think
very useful.
A couple of other things that I've seen which have been really impactful is people moving their meetings where necessary from Zoom to telephone. So just encouraging people to go for a walk together has been a nice way to recharge the batteries. Really remembering that actually commutes were significantly detrimental to our well-being. Lots of studies that have demonstrated that long commutes can really take it out of you. But remembering the good bits of the commute, like that nice chapter beginning and end, like you say, Rory, it kind of, you know, kind of contains the day. So maybe having a little ritual at the beginning or the end of the day. And then I'm seeing across some of our more agile organizations, really thinking about what policies will enable asynchronous working. So, you know, people who have got caring responsibilities want a slightly different working pattern. How can that be kind of really embedded into the organization without making some other people feel like they have to be working at 10 o'clock at night? But yeah, smart ways for building asynchronous working may also be quite powerful.
Fantastic, thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. We said we'd go for half an hour with some time for questions. So look, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Hope this has been useful for you. Please spread the word. If any of your colleagues would be interested, we're running the same session next Wednesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if this has been of interest to you, obviously we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch. If you're working with us already, let's keep going. If you're not, get in touch, because we're very excited to be doing some great work this year with a whole range of clients and helping them prepare and perform in these exciting and challenging times. But have a great day, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us all. Okay, and thanks, Gary. Good job. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Cheers, thank you.
Bye, everyone.